And what happens is you go, well, if I can just get into the sinless state, then I won't be tempted ever. And then if I'm never tempted, I'll never sin. And I know it sounds silly to some people, but some people know exactly what I'm talking about. And you've dealt with it. And it hasn't been fun. And I get it, right? But that is not a good place to be. So, what am I doing? Or what am I trying to do? Let's talk about it. So, first of all, my name is Bazzi. Been podcasting for 5 to 6 years, something like that. And it's been heavy on my heart ever since I started podcasting to try to bring truth to people in a palatable way. And over that course, I feel like I've been very cautious to some degree about how I speak and how I bring these things up. And I don't necessarily think that's been helpful. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because as I evolve into what I really believe is something God has really put on my heart, right? To be able to communicate the hard things in an easy way, to be able to give people just a little bit of clarity to some of those things that seem a little bit foggy. And, you know, over the years that I've been trying to work on this craft, I've had a lot of bumps and bruises. So for those of you that don't know, I'm one half of the official Bosscast. I typically do the podcast with my lovely, beautiful wife of 10 years. That's right. That's a 10-piece wing dinner. Mad sides. Mac and cheese. You know what I mean? Talking about, you know what I mean? Mashed potatoes and gravy. Greens. I'm on my health kick, so I like Brussels sprouts. Anyway, so yeah, me and my wife, we've been together for quite a long time. And in that time, we've always wanted to kind of talk to people just about how our faith, our relationship, and how our relationship really stems off of our faith. And I think we've done a really good job as far as like just growing and having honest conversations. And I think being honest in what we do has also been very, very beneficial to us and our growth and all that good stuff, right? So as we started the podcast, I guess I'll give a little bit of background. I started a podcast because I started music, right? So I was a musician. I always enjoyed being a musician. I've always been a singer. And then for a while, I started rapping. And rapping was cool. I enjoyed rapping. And I started listening to The Breakfast Club really, really heavy. I started really, really enjoying the long form conversations that people were having on The Breakfast Club. So because of that, I decided, okay, cool. Like, I'm going to do my music, and eventually, you know, I'll be able to get on a platform like The Breakfast Club and just kind of speak truth. And I know that some of the guests that The Breakfast Club have had in the past have definitely made an impact on me, especially early-ish on right around the Birdman, all three of y'all, debacle. That's something that's I've always kind of enjoyed. As I'm doing my music, at some point I decided to go and get some formal education, going to school for audio engineering. So I had all this equipment and all this knowledge on how to mix and record and do all this other stuff. But as a musician, my skill set isn't necessarily producing. So I was just getting to like these ruts of like creativity until one day I'm just like, man, I want to be a steward of all of my equipment. I want to use this as much as I possibly can. And something clicked. We would have conversations all the time at work. And those conversations would just, I don't know, like they seemed to be fruitful, or at least the dialogue was almost like addicting. And then people would listen to my takes. I seem to have an uncanny ability to be able to get people that are stern, firm on their takes to just pause right? And think and question everything that they thought was true. Which with great power comes great responsibility, right? So some of that is great, and then some of it is not. I want to light a candle because I like candles. I always like candles, but rest in peace to Kevin Samuels. Rest in peace. Candle of the day, Glade something. I don't have a fragrance on, but do I have one over here? Okay, we'll do Nautica Voyage. There you have it. Anyway, so I had this uncanny ability just to be able to get people to just really question what they got, what they have as like a concrete thought. And I'll explain why that's important later. But I had this uncanny ability to be able to do that. And I still have that ability. And like I was saying, with great power comes great responsibility. So if I had that power and I use that power for evil, right, I could get people to believe something or at least question something that they have hard truths on and things that are just flatly true. By the grace of God, I've had an encounter with God, right? I've had an encounter with Jesus. So because of that, I do understand objective truths. And it's because of that I've continued to chip away at my faith. When I say chip away at it, I mean just kind of like attack the crevices, right? Like when you're mining for gold, right, you're gonna hit, it's gonna seem violent, but you're just gonna hit away at it and get rid of the debris to get the thing that we want, right? The gold or whatever the precious metal or jewels or anything that we do any mining for. So because of that, it helped me to be able to come to really, really concrete, concentrated ideas. Those conversations just kind of bled off, and people would just be like, man, you should start a podcast. It's that mixed with I would have conversations and just like allow people to talk. People would feel heard, but they never felt babied or coddled around me. So I'd listen, but I'd also give real direction, right? I'd give real opinion. I'd give real perspective. And I never tell people necessarily what to do. I just tell people what I wouldn't do and why. And typically those two things coupled together over the course of, we'll call it the better part of a decade, have gotten me to understand who I am, right? Now, this started years ago, and sorry for the sun, but it's kind of like beautiful natural light, so I'm just gonna let it rock. Now, this started years ago, right? When I was in high school, I thought I wanted to go to school for psychology, so I did that. Long story short, didn't finish. But you mix my two backgrounds, right, of audio engineering and psychology together, and it just kind of it breeds something that works, right? It breeds something that comes together and kind of uses a couple skill sets that I've been able to either been born with or I've been able to acquire over the course of my life, right? So not only will we have good broad conversations at work, but we'd also have good one-on-one conversations at work. And I had started developing a really, really good leadership skill and style. So anyway, as I'd have these conversations, I'd get the most productivity out of my people, and people didn't understand why, and I didn't understand why. Like, I'm just like, oh, I'm just the best. What it was is, in my opinion, people come to work with a heavy burden. I let them talk to me for a half hour. They're just lighter. They're just emotionally lighter, and I think they just did better work. Because of that, it promoted me, right? But not only that, so there's like concrete evidence, but then people would be like, man, you should be a life coach. So I went ahead and went through a full course of life coaching, learned a lot. And then I just realized, like, man, people have these ideas that they believe are gospel, but those ideas don't lean on the gospel. So it was a difficult season of me trying to go through the life coaching process, because it was very spiritual and it felt devoid of God, right? Now, I'm not saying that there can't be like a Christian life coach. I'm not saying that there's a problem with people. I'm not saying there's a problem with people being spiritual or being cognizant of those things, but right, there is a truth. There's a truth that has amazing historical implications, and we can't gloss over that, right? And as a logical thinker, I was never okay with just glossing over that. That just never felt right, so I didn't. But what does that mean, right? So now we're here, and this whole journey, which sounds like a disgusting, like, spaghetti pile of information, is I would go from being what I consider to be a pretty decent podcaster, right? Like, I built it from the ground up. I very early on decided I didn't want to have my podcast be based off of any one DSP. So I created a website that sent it to all the major DSPs, but I had to learn how to code certain types of things. And but going that long route, it helped me out tremendously, right? Now we're here, right? All of these things have come to a point where we're here. And you're probably asking or wondering, what is here? Well, I can tell you what here is, right? So here is me getting to a point where I have this ability, right? These natural abilities, whether it be to speak, whether it be to present, whether it be to teach, whether it be to listen. I have these abilities. And then I have this faith. I have this faith in the one true God, right? Like, I have this faith in Jesus Christ. And it is not until right now that I feel good about being able to admit the faith I have in Jesus Christ. And I'm not proud of that, right? I've always been a Christian I've always considered myself, I'll say that. I've always considered myself a Christian for as long as I can really remember. I remember asking enough questions as a kid to being able to kind of put my little flag into the hill of Christianity. Asking the right questions, I think, as a 6-year-old. What happens when we die? What do you mean? Like, we never, our spirits never die. Like, just these types of questions. And feeling confident enough in the answers that my wonderful parents provided me, namely my dad, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with my mom, but my dad was like the spiritual leader in our house. And the one thing about my dad that was really interesting is that my dad, like, never pushed anything on us, right? Like, so I grew up in a Lutheran church, and the whole time my dad's like, we're not Lutheran, we go to a Lutheran church. So he's like, we're Christians, right? We read the Bible. Like, that's just what my dad would say. And I just ate that up. I'm like, okay, bet. So then I would start going to a Pentecostal church, but I never considered myself Pentecostal. I just consider myself a Christian that goes to this church. We can go over all the things that have happened that got me to the faith that I am now. But what I will say is that it wasn't until recently that I fully understood the gospel. When I say recently, maybe over the last year, that I fully understood the gospel, right? Like, we all go through our bouts of, like, legalism. We all go through our bouts of, like, not fully understanding things. We all have these, like, questions that can't be, or that feel like they can't be answered. And I think as you get older, especially in the faith, those things start to affect you way differently. Well, it means when you're a kid, especially if you're going to a private school, your ideas are never challenged. And that's good and that's bad, right? Like, to a degree, you should be able to be fostered in a situation where you're just given information, and that information can just be true. But here's the problem. And one of my best friends, Dan, like, I would love to get him on a podcast, but one of my best friends, Dan, we had this conversation back in, I can't even remember when it was. Like, we've been friends for over a decade, closer to 2 decades. And I remember one time he was like, yeah, the problem with religion and Christianity is that you learn science from kindergarten all the way up. You learn math from kindergarten all the way up. You learn English from kindergarten all the way up. You learn all these things from the beginning, and it never really stops. But what happens is, since religion is an elective, which it shouldn't be it should be to a degree, and it shouldn't be to a degree. It should be an elective because I don't think anyone should be forced into any faith or any religion. And I think God intends it to be that way. God does not want your forced love, right? We can go into this and we will have conversations about this, but that's the purpose of the tree, right? The purpose of the tree in the Garden of Eden is because God does not want your forced worship. He wants your willful submission, right? So because of that, I don't believe that any religion should be forced on anybody. But I do believe that we can trust the Bible as a historical document for multiple reasons, right? For just style of literature, the Bible can be used all through school. For historical content, it can be used. There's so much in the Bible that cross-references with so many other things and it should be allowed to be the source, but I understand the hardness of people's hearts are not going to allow that. I'm fine with it. It's okay. We still love you. But all those things put together is what makes me believe we should, to a degree, everyone should be able to study the Bible consistently throughout their lives. So this is what happens, right? And this is going to be a longish video, right? We'll get to the meat and the potatoes here in a second. But when you're growing up and with all these other things, you have discourse, debate, conversation, talking about it all through your life. And then once your reasoning muscles start to develop in your brain, then you start to have better arguments and better discourse, right? But when you stop learning about Christianity at the end of Vacation Bible School, right, or Sunday school, you're never, ever going to get into those meat and potatoes of those discussions and debates, right? So I've been very, very blessed to be a part of these discussions and debates, because what happens is people test your faith, and then you go, wait, I don't know the answer to that. Then you start to, if you really care, you start to look forward. You start to dig deep into these types of conversations, right? So with that being said, that's what's happened to me over the past 5 years. The answers never felt right. The people I was getting the answers from did not feel like they really knew the answer. They just felt like they wanted to give me an answer, which I have no malice for. We're human, right? And the reason I don't have malice for that is because of fully understanding the gospel. So there are people that they'll be like, oh, well, you have to do this certain thing. You have to do this certain thing. If you're not doing this thing, you cannot be considered a Christian. And to be honest with you, abstinence is great in any case, right? Abstaining from drinking is great. Abstaining from sex is great. Abstaining from whatever the negative thing that can be brought to you is great. But abstaining ignorantly, that's a no-go, Papo, because now you don't really know why you're doing it or why you're not doing something. And the problem with that is when you just start to one day question it, you start to go, well, there's nothing wrong with any of this. Why are we inherently saying that this is a bad thing, right? It's weird. But this is what happens. So over the past 5 years, I've just been, I guess you could call it, deconstructing everything that I've been told about the Bible and trying to match it up with what the Bible actually says. And it's been tough, right? Because some of that has made my faith really, really shaky. 2 shakies. If you watch Wild 'N Out, you'll know what I'm talking about. But some of that it's made me realize that some of the things that I hold to be so true have been actually me building my house upon the sand, which is a tough realization to come to, right? And so then you start to do weird things, and I'm gonna get to it, right? But then you start to do weird things, like when people are arguing with you about how holy you are, which is a weird conversation that really happens, right? And has happened in my life, which is a silly conversation. Look at all these things I don't do. Look at all these things I do. And I'm a good person because I am this way over here and this way. These things get shaky. They get so shaky. And what has happened to me is as I'm going through life, and it's like, oh, I do these really good things on this side, but I'm really, really bad over here. When you have areas of your life that you don't struggle in, and especially in this new agey way of thinking, you get into a place where you really feel like, if I could just get into we call it, there's ketosis, there's all these different states that we're trying to get ourselves into, all this control we just want to have so badly, right? And what happens is you go, well, if I can just get into this sinless state, then I won't be tempted ever. And then if I'm never tempted, I'll never sin. And I know it sounds silly to some people, but some people know exactly what I'm talking about. Some people know exactly what I mean, and you've dealt with it, and it hasn't been fun. And I get it, right? But that is not a good place to be. So there was one day where I'm listening to the gospel, and you think like, oh, I'm listening to the gospel, whatever. I'm listening to the gospel. And something just takes over me, right? Like I'm just weeping, crying, and I'm like nervous because I'm on my way home and I'm already like, I'm getting older, right? So my vision at night, especially like when it's raining or when there's water, like it gets really blurred, like the lights get really blurry, but it's getting worse because my eyes are just welling up with these tears. So I'm trying my best to just like get home. And I get home and then I just lock myself in my office right over there actually. And I'm weeping and crying, and I'm like repenting and really, really remorseful. And you're probably thinking like, oh, you probably had that moment where you're like really, you feel really bad for your sins. And no, that wasn't it. I had this moment where I felt really, really bad for my ignorance in the gospel. The idea that any one of us can think that we can do anything to escape the grips of hell, it's preposterous, right? But you have to understand how serious of a deal sin is to God and to all of us, right? Like the Bible's very, very, especially in the New Testament. I love how the New Testament kind of conceptualized this as little things grow into big things, right? I can't remember the exact verse right off the top of my head. Maybe I'll place it somewhere over here. But it basically says that sin breeds, and when it's fully grown, gives birth to death or something like that. So it starts as a little tiny sin, and then it grows into death. And I think it's really, really indicative on the Sermon on the Mount, right? Where Jesus goes, okay, you heard it said don't murder, but I tell you that if you have something against your brother, you've already committed murder in your heart. Or if you hate your brother, you already committed murder in your heart, or something like that. I tend to minimize it even more because we need to understand that anything not of God is sin, and anything sinful leads to death. Right? When they say, oh, don't commit adultery, he goes, yeah. But what I say is if you even looked after a woman lustfully, then you've already committed adultery in your heart. And the reason that these things are so important is that especially murder, if you remember when David had, I believe his name is Uriah. Sorry, I'm not like this super Bible scholar. Murdered. He says, he's praying and he says to God, you don't delight in sacrifice. Right? Or there's no sacrifice for what I've done or something along those lines, because there was no sacrifice good enough to atone for murder. But if Jesus is telling us, right, that even hatred is murder, then that means that there's nothing we can do. And that's what penetrated my heart. In that moment when I'm driving home, it's like, I'm over here like, well, why can't I just be better? And then like the Holy Spirit kind of like just conceptualized this as like, you can't be, and you don't need to be, right? You just need to put your faith and trust in the work of Jesus Christ. So we come full circle. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why is there a 20 some odd minute video about somebody that no one knows? No one knows me. No one cares about my story. But the reason this is a big deal is because as a Christian, I lived the majority of my life not fully putting my trust and faith in the work of the cross. I can only imagine how many of you are in the same boat. You don't even know what that means. You don't even know what it means to put all of your trust and all of your faith and all of your hope into the work of the cross. I didn't until recently. And because of that, I can't just make a podcast. Because of that, I can't just help people just understand parts of the Bible better. I have to continue. I have to explicitly express the gospel message at any given time I can. Right? It's incumbent upon me, and there are enough people that follow what I do and what I've done that, man, if 3 of those people can conceptualize the gospel a little bit better and be able to understand what it means to put their full trust and faith into the gospel of Jesus Christ, then, man, that is a good thing too. So in these coming months and these coming years, my wife and I are going to do a lot of work to help people that lifelong believers that lifelong believers that may or may not believe in the work of the cross fully, or may or may not even understand the work of the cross. I want to help people have a better understanding of the simplicity of the gospel. And that's what Paul calls it, the simplicity of Jesus Christ. It's so simple, right? But it's hard for us to conceptualize, because we would never do something without a benefit attached to it, right? We would never do something just for free without expecting something, especially around these holidays that are coming up. It gets tough for us, right? But think about it. Think about those people you really love that you give a gift to. Do you really expect anything from them? Or do you just really want them to have something because you wanted them to have it? Something to think about. But anyway, this has been me, right? This has been what this new season of my life is going to be like. And yeah, I'm excited for it. And I hope you're all excited for it as well, because we're going to have some fun. We're going to have some fun. But anyway, at the end of the day, it's almost the end of my day. And I just want to make sure that I tell y'all, we've done this podcast for a while. We've told people to be all these types of things, be official. But I just want you all to be blessed and hopefully just, join me on this journey of finally doing what I believe God has wanted me to do for a very, very long time, accompanied by my wife and hopefully many, many others. So peace and got that work.